Good evening and welcome to this public forum with the candidates for the Legislative District 34. I'm Hannah Fishbeck with the League of Women Voters, and I will be your moderator this evening. This candidate forum has been organized by the League of Women Voters of Bismarck-Mandan, the Bismarck Tribune, and is co-sponsored by Dakota Media Access. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes the informed participation of all citizens in their government. The League does not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. All 6 candidates for North Dakota's Legislative District 34 have joined us here tonight. They are Stacey J. Bendish, Dwight Cook, Lori Furris, Sid Cattermas, Todd K. Porter, and Nathan P. Toman. The audience is invited to submit questions using the index cards provided to you. Viewers at home can phone in questions by calling 667-3237 between now and 6:45 p.m., tonight only, Thursday, October 4th of 2012. The number again is 667-3237. This is intended to be a respectful exchange of ideas. Our purpose this evening is to provide voters with information about the candidates and their positions on issues that affect the people of District 34. Now, let's meet our candidates. I will read a short bio of each candidate. After your bio is read, you will have 1 minute to tell us why you are seeking election to the North Dakota Legislative District 34. First, for our first bio, we will start off with Lori Furris. Lori Furris is a candidate for the State House of Representatives, is currently employed as a client service representative with a local insurance agency. Furris has lived in Mandan for 26 years. She is a graduate of Mandan High School. Furris is a chairperson for District 34 Democratic NPL, is a past secretary of the Mandan Dakota Lions Club, and is a member of Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society. Furris is currently a third-year student at BSC, where she is pursuing a bachelor's degree in elementary education. We will now move on to Todd Porter. Currently a representative, Todd Porter, running for re-election. Porter, a lifelong Mandan resident, has been a trained paramedic for more than 30 years. Since 1983, he's been one of the owners of Metro Area Ambulance Service, Inc. Porter serves on the House Energy and Natural Resources Committees, is chairman for the Bismarck-Burley 911 Users Board and a Little League coach, and is a member of Pheasants Forever, Mandan Progress Organization, Bismarck-Mandan Chamber of Commerce, Bismarck-Mandan Development Association, the North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, and Mandan Baseball. When we go back to Lori Furris, I'm sorry I forgot that you get 1 minute to explain to everyone why you are running for office.
Thank you, Hannah. As Hannah said, I'm a Mandan resident. I was born and raised in Mandan. I am also in a committed relationship of 5 years with my boyfriend, and together we share the joy and the responsibility of raising his 10-year-old daughter, Haley. You know, as a young family in Mandan, raising a child, I understand a lot of the concerns in our community and also the concern for our future. Just a side note, if Haley's watching, Haley is, she made the decision last night to run for student council tomorrow, so I'm very excited to get home tonight and work with her in that endeavor. But I feel like I have the drive, I have the energy and the commitment to this community to be a good candidate.
Mr. Porter, it's now your turn to tell everyone in a 1 minute speech why you're running for office.
Thank you, Hannah. I'd first of all like to thank the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to get together. I always enjoy these forums and the opportunity. Having served Mandan for the past 14 years, being a lifelong resident of Mandan and running a business in Mandan, I think makes me uniquely qualified to continue leading the way for the citizens of Mandan at the state legislature. I think we've done a lot of wonderful things in the 14 years that I've been at the Capitol. We've made a lot of strides. We've made a lot of changes in state policies to enable businesses and enable basically the future of North Dakota to move forward. And we're seeing a lot of the rewards of our policies right now as we go through the oil boom that we're currently seeing and the economic boom that we're currently seeing. And so I would just ask the voters to continue to put their trust in me, and I look forward to serving again in the next legislative session.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. We'll now move on to the bio of Mr. Bendish. Stacey J. Bendish is running for a District 34 Senate seat. Bendish has been a resident of Mandan since 1992. He graduated of Mandan High School, 2 naval training schools, BSc where he received an Associate Arts degree in History, and UND where he received a BA in History. Bendish taught for 3 years in 4-8s and served 6 years active duty and 18 years as a reservist for the Navy. He has 10 years as a journeyman boilermaker. Bendish is past president and vice president for the Fleet Reserve Association, Rough Rider Branch, and is a member of the American Legion. Mr. Bendish, you now have a minute to tell everyone why you're running for office.
I decided to run for office because there's a lot going on in North Dakota right now, and I've got a young family. I have 5 children between ages of 3 and 17, and I just feel that more things need to be done. You know, the legislature, I feel a lot of times doesn't quite go as far as they should, and they just come up short. And I'd like to try to help do more, help the state grow, progress, help the city of Mandan be more successful and grow, because Mandan has really struggled with all the growth the state has, and just needs to be more done than is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tolman. We'll now move on to the bio of thank you, Mr. Bendish. I'm looking at names ahead. We'll now move on to the bio of Mr. Tolman. Nathan Tolman is also a candidate for the State House of Representatives. He has lived in Mandan for 2.5 years. Currently an information systems specialist for Ducks Unlimited, Tolman has extensive professional experience with computers. He's been a computer programmer, server, and network administrator, and worked in computer support. Tolman graduated from BSc with an Associate Arts degree. He is a member of Ducks Unlimited, the Mandan Historical Society, and serves on the board of directors for a Leap of Faith dance. Mr. Tolman, you all have a minute to tell everyone why you're running for office.
Thanks to the League of Women Voters for this opportunity for the candidates to discuss their ideas. I decided to run because I'm passionate about providing a economically strong, fiscally responsible North Dakota with broad opportunities for our next generations. And I'm passionate about that because I'm a father of 4, and we've chosen Mandan to raise our children in. So I believe that I'm equipped through professional experience to help in the technology needs and any other needs of the state growth that there would be there. Once again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Tolman. We'll now move on to the bio of Ms. Cattermess. Sid Cattermess was raised on a Stark County farm and a resident of Mandan for 18 years, is also a candidate for the House of Representatives. Cattermess currently works for the Bismarck-Mandan Convention and Visitors Bureau and has previous work experience with the elderly, developmentally disabled, and with the Mandan school system. Cattermess is interested in economic development on oil impact and development. She has 4 living children and is a grandmother of 3. Ms. Cattermess, you can now have 1 minute to tell everyone why you're running for office.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for providing us this opportunity to have our voices be heard here. I'm running for office here in District 34. In District 34, mostly out of my life experiences. I believe there's time for a change in our legislature. We have to be more progressive thinking in this state, and I think that that's important to this community here in Mandan. And I'm also running because I feel the need to give back to this community. Mandan has been a wonderful city. It's been a great place to live. I raised my children here. The school system here is wonderful. And with having a special needs child for so long, she did beautifully here because of the school system here. And also, I have many family members that are a part of the oil field coming from Dickinson, and I think that our community can do well in economic development, and we need to get progressive.
Thank you, Mrs. Katames. We will now move on to Mr. Cook. Dwight Cook, State Senate candidate, is self-employed in industrial sales. Cook has been a state senator for 16 years. He chaired the Political Subdivisions Committee for 4 legislative sessions and chaired the Tax Committee during the last 2 legislation sessions. Cook has served as chairman for the Morton County Housing Authority, is a past president for the American Legion and his church, and has been active with the National Federation of Independent Business and the American Legion. A Mandan resident for 30 years, Cook attended NDSU for 1 year. Mr. Cook, you can now tell everyone for 1 minute why you're running for office.
Thank you, Hannah, and again, too, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for having this forum. It's a great. I wasn't going to forget to do that, but thank you, Hannah. And again, thank you to the League of Women Voters. I'm glad I'm not the only grandpa here. I have 3 children and 8 grandchildren, including twin daughters, identical twin daughters that are about 3 months old. So I certainly have some concerns about the youth and the future of this country. It's an honor. It's truly been an honor to serve the people of Mandan for the last 16 years as their state senator. An honor and a privilege. I thank the people of Mandan for their past support, and I look forward and ask for their continued support. You know, 16 years ago, I ran first off because I was asked, and secondly because I thought I could make a difference. 4 years later, I sought my second term because I was comfortable that I had made a difference and thought I could make even a bigger difference. Today, I run for that same reason. I think that chairing the Senate Tax Committee is probably one of the most important jobs we have right now. I hope we talk about taxes. Taxes are a big issue, and it's an important position to have, and it's an important position for Mandan.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. And now we'll move on to the questions developed by the Bismarck Tribune, members of the League of Women Voters, our audience here tonight, and our viewers at home. To submit a question, please use the index cards provided on your chairs. Viewers at home can phone in questions by calling 667-3237 between now and 6:45 p.m. tonight, Thursday, October 4th of 2012. That number again is 667-3237. Candidates have not been given advance copies of the questions, and after 3 candidates have answered a question, the next candidate in order will receive a new question with the option to address a previous question if they choose. Who addresses the question first will be rotated. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to each question. Please comply with our time restrictions so that we can get to as many questions as possible tonight. Our timer will let you know when you're down to 30 seconds, then 10 seconds, and stop. So we will now begin with our questions. Our first question will be directed to Mrs. Furris. Voters defeated an attempt to ban property tax, but there's general agreement that property tax relief is needed and adjustments should be made in the state's tax structure, property, sales, and income taxes. What do you propose?
Thank you, Hannah. I'm glad that you mentioned Measure 2. While Measure 2 was strongly defeated, I do think that it sent a strong message from North Dakotans to our legislators that we really need to do something. We need to provide property tax relief to North Dakota. That's bottom line. We need it. We need to accomplish this, though, while maintaining funding for local public services. And I know there's a lot of proposed plans on the table. Some of them that I thought were great they include a homestead tax credit that provides property tax relief for seniors and people with disabilities. Property tax relief should extend to homeowners and farm owners as well as renters. I think it's important that we don't do this. We don't sacrifice our public services. We need to find a way to fund those as well.
Mr. Porter, you will now be able to answer question 1 as well.
Thank you. Taxes are a very interesting and unique situation in North Dakota. Property taxes are a local tax. They are capped and controlled by the state of North Dakota, but they still belong to the people at the local level. We have used the surplus oil money to help buy down some of the school taxes. Next legislative session, I have a bill draft ready to go that has the state pay 100% of the school mandated programs, so that we take the schools kind of out of the mix of property taxes. We've done in the last session $500 million worth of tax relief, which puts money right back into the pockets of the citizens, and I hope that we can do even more next session.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr. Bendish, you will now be given the opportunity to answer question 1 as well.
Property taxes are a big issue in Mandan. This city has some of the highest in the state, so I hear people live in Bismarck pay less for a $150,000 house than we do in Mandan. But it's one of the reasons I got interested in running it, because we need to do something more for Mandan to give relief to the people. You know, tax breaks we've gotten don't really keep up with the new assessments on our property. Even though cities and counties are dropping their schools or dropping their mills, you're still paying the same amount every year. So the mills just become a multiplier, but they don't really change the amount every taxpayer in the state, in the city is paying out. Measure 2, the problem was it didn't have any mechanisms to say how they were going to replace the property taxes. It didn't do any limitations in any of the 200 odd reserve funds that this state has that where money is getting put. If it would have had some mechanism for how property taxes are going to be replaced, maybe it would have been a good idea. Some of those changes may be constitutional, because there's a lot of money that goes into the state in tax revenue that can't be touched because of it. It's tied to the Constitution. If it had been more fairly done, it would have been worthwhile.
Thank you, Mr. Bendish. I also want to let the candidates know if there's any point when they want me to repeat the questions, I will gladly do so for them. We'll now move on to question number 2, and Mr. Tolman, you will start off this one. Question number 2, the state's budget surplus creates an opportunity for the legislator to do projects or develop programs which it cannot afford in the past. What new initiatives would you support in the 2013 legislature?
The budget surplus does provide a unique opportunity for North Dakota to make up things we couldn't afford in the past on maintenance and new infrastructure and such. I would support smart spending decisions that would be sustainable into the future, so that we wouldn't be caught having to pay for those later on. Rather than just throwing money at those needs, we would need to make educated decisions on how that would be spent.
Thank you, Mr. Tolman. Ms. Cattermas, you'll now be able to answer question number 2 as well.
Yeah, I believe our budget surplus should be used for, of course, infrastructure, especially infrastructure that involves the western side of the state, which is in dire need of some work for infrastructure needs, roads, streets, all the way to emergency services and building of schools and all of that. And this budget surplus needs to be used in that direction.
Thank you, Ms. Cattermas. Mr. Cook, you'll now be able to answer question number 2.
First off, I would like to tell the voters and the listeners that this is an excellent flow chart that shows where our revenue from the oil tax, how much we get and where it goes. You can find this on the Legislative Council. You can also find it on the Cook-Porter-Tolman website. But it's an excellent form. I would encourage you to go out there. You'll see just how few of trust funds we have. Budget surplus, we've been dealing with this every session. There's one of 3 things that we argue and debate over: how much we save, how much we spend, and how much we give back. As chairman of the tax committee, I always fight to try to give as much back to the taxpayers as we can. OMB just came out yesterday with the new budget numbers and the projections for the income for the next budget. We are going to have a rather large surplus available. I should also tell you that it's a very volatile source of income that comes from this oil industry. We can lose it as quick as we get it, but we got to have a balance between what we spend, what we invest, and what we give back.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Ms. Ferris, this time you will be allowed to skip over the first question, and we will be directing question number 3 for the first answer to Mr. Porter. The third question is, what level and kind of pay increase do you think the 2013 legislature will be able to offer state employees?
Well, Hannah, that number is usually a number that comes to us through the budgeting process, which is done by the governor. In the past, I have been very supportive of the state employee pay package and the benefits package for the state employees, including the health and their retirement program. I have been the prime sponsor of the bill that actually carved out the pay package from the governor's budget in order to make sure that it was something that was done first rather than last. And I've proudly been there for the state employees, both in Mandan and across the state. But as far as that number, usually we gauge that based on what the governor brings to us rather than what we would bring to the governor.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr. Bendish, you'll now have the opportunity to answer question number 3 as well.
As far as pay for raise for the state employees, I'd have to agree with Mr. Porter that it would depend on the budget that comes to us and the money that figures are there when we see them in session. Yeah, it is. We do need to probably give the employees the raise, but you know, traditionally I think they've been given 3%, 2%, 5%. What the budget shows they can have or is there is probably where we would go with that. But, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bendish. Mr. Tolman, you'll now have the opportunity to answer question number 3.
I hate to sound like a copycat, but I agree with Bendish and Porter that we need to support our state employees and make sure that they're fairly and properly paid in their pay packages, and we just look to see what kind of bill that the governor would send to us and how we would fund that would be the main the main things we could look at there at this point in time. But I think we need to make sure that they're fairly compensated.
Thank you, Mr. Tolman. We'll now move on to question 4, and Ms. Cattermas, you will be the first answer on this question. Question number 4. North Dakotans have been told that state government is playing catch-up with the oil boom. The Secretary of State's office was forced to reduce public hours so that it could catch up on business filings. Another result is the state's judicial branch will request additional district judges to relieve the backlog in cases that have jails overflowing in the oil patch. Do you have any concerns about staffing levels in state government?
Yeah, I do have some concerns. I think our legislature was ill-prepared for this oil impact that we've had in the last few years. I think they were made knowledgeable of it quite a few years ago and sat by and let things just kind of happen instead of getting progressive and saying, hey, this is coming and we need to get some money out to the West. And yeah, they are playing catch up, and I'm not willing to sit by and wait for Mandan to play catch up as well. I think that we need to start thinking about our future here, the future of our children, and that we need to prepare for the impact that is going to be felt here as well. And we are already feeling some of that. So I think our infrastructure needs need to be increased around Mandan here, and there will be more building going on, and that's important.
Thank you, Ms. Cattermas. Mr. Cook, do you have any concerns about staffing levels in state government?
Hannah, again, I'll say this, that the oil industry is the most volatile industry out there. We have seen it boom before in this state, and we've seen it crash overnight, and all of a sudden it was gone. It could happen again with things that we don't have control over. We meet every 2 years. That's one of our challenges, yet I would not change that. There's not too many states that do meet biannually, and we do a very good job. But we are over the peak now. We have met our peak. We can see the rigs coming down. I think we're down to about 183 rigs, the last I heard. We're going to start coming into a very stable oil production in the state of North Dakota. It'll become much more predictable. Do we have catching up to do? You bet we do, and we have the resources now to do it, and that's what our job will be in this next session.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Ms. Ferris, do you have any concerns about staffing levels in state government?
I think some of the concerns that were already expressed, just basically, I don't think any of us were prepared for the growth. At this point, all the planning that we're doing is really thinking ahead, along with making sure that we have enough employees. I think it's important that we're also considering the infrastructure of these places when it comes to roads and bridges and sewer systems and those types of things. So So it's really, I would agree that we really need to plan forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferris. Again, I invite our in-house audience to submit questions using the index cards provided by our volunteers. Television viewers can call 667-3237 during our forum tonight, Thursday, October 4th of 2012. Mr. Porter, you'll be now allowed the skip of the first question, and we will start question number 5 on Mr. Bendish. North Dakota cities and counties use a mix of Renaissance zones, tax increment financing districts, home construction tax credits, and various other incentives for growth. Do you support maintaining these exemptions and incentives as tools for local jurisdiction to manage and direct growth?
Yes, I do support continuing them. I think they're an important way to bring in good, high-paying jobs. I think they really well, if you bring in a type of industry which actually brings a lot of benefit to community for those kind of things, I think they work really well. As far as the problem we had in Mandan, thing about Walmart coming in and asking for a tax break, you do have to wonder why the richest corporation in the United States is in the world actually is asking for a public assistance handout to build a new store. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do believe the city of Mandan had to make sure that store came here, so they were caught in a rock and a hard place, and it wasn't an easy place for a politician to be, to have to take a stand on something like that. And you know, I sat here and I watched them and I listened to their discussions, and you know, Mandan would need that. Small towns do need that. It is a good way for small towns to bring in businesses, as long as it is used appropriately.
Thank you, Mr. Bendish. Mr. Tolman, do you support maintaining these exemptions and incentives as tools for local jurisdiction to manage and direct growth?
I think those various tax incentives can be used well for growth, but I think it also needs to be looked at and not be handed out to everyone. I think it should be, especially with the boom we have going on right now, I think we just need to make, city council members would need to make smart decision, and county commissioners, on how that would be handled and why they would be handing those out to those businesses, and what the economic ramifications of that is. Are they providing sales tax, and how are they going to recoup those tax breaks rather than letting the citizens recoup that cost?
Thank you, Mr. Tolman. Ms. Cattermass, do you support maintaining these exemptions and incentives as tools for local jurisdiction to manage and direct growth?
Yeah, I do support that. I think that it should be more geared towards small businesses versus corporations and the like. Tax incentives are needed here for small businesses to grow in this community, and I think we need to continue using those tax incentives and supporting our small businesses in this community.
Thank you, Ms. Cattermass. We will now move on to question number 6. Mr. Cook, you will start off with question number 6. This is a question from the audience, and it is as follows. How do you plan to address the child care shortage in North Dakota? Do you consider supporting Head Start as an option?
Sure, I chair the tax committee, and the other 3 people get all the tax questions, and now you come with a child care question to me. I think Sandy Tipke had something to do with this, but we certainly have a child care issue in this state, and it's going to be an issue that we're going to discuss in the next session. Along with child care, we have a housing challenge, and I think the 2 of them go hand in hand. I chair the Morton County Housing Authority. There's things that we are doing to solve some of the housing shortages we have for low-income people, which will make it a lot easier. The child care problems that we have, of course, it's here. I mentioned a daughter with twin granddaughters. She pays $1,000 a month for child care. It's a lot of money. It's a mortgage payment. We're going to have work on that. I don't know where we're going to be able to resolve that issue in the next session, but I guarantee you it'll be on the table, and it'll probably be in Todd Porter's Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Ms. Ferris, is now your turn to answer the question.
Thank you, Hannah. Interesting statistic that I found out is that North Dakota only meets 41% of the demand for childcare. That's not even half. daycare is definitely an issue, and I think there's been a lack of leadership on the issue. One aspect of the issue of childcare is the workforce. We need to look at things associated with the workforce and improve the salary and possibly create benefits. We have to address the issue of capacity as well as the quality of the daycares. I recently attended a Child Care Solution Summit, and one of the messages that stuck with me that I thought was really powerful is that children are 1/3 of our population, but those children are 100% of our future. And we need to step up to meet the needs. Thank you.
Mr. Porter, it is now your turn to answer the question.
Thank you. As businesses move into the state, and as we see the influx of new jobs and unemployment rate hovering around 3%, one of the biggest concerns that employers have is daycare. The employees that they're trying to recruit for their business tell them, boy, we'd love to come to work, but we don't have any place to take our kids. The daycare centers are full, especially when you get out into the rural areas. I think we need to look at our rules and regulations on how we license daycares to make sure that as a government we aren't impeding the startup and the development of daycares across the state. We have programs and block grant programs through the Department of Commerce currently. As we look at the Head Start part of the question, we started a new program last session called Gearing Up for Kindergarten that was meant to kind of be the bridge between Head Start and kindergarten.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr. Benish, you will now be given the opportunity for the skip of the first answer to the question, and we'll now move on to Mr. Toman. Mr. Toman, you will start off by answering question number 7. The oil reserves in North Dakota are predicted to last more than 10 years. Today, Alaska takes its oil revenue and gives a percentage back to its people. Would you support a dividend check to get back to our North Dakotan people?
As a taxpayer and a resident of North Dakota, I think that sounds like a great idea. The voters did pass the legacy fund, I believe as it's called, and that could be something that we would look at when we can start spending that money to give people rebate checks out of that fund. And I think that could be a metric we could figure out based on our population in 2015 when we can start spending the interest on that.
Thank you, Mr. Toman. Ms. Cattermass, would you support a dividend check to North Dakotans?
I would rather see it go into a fund for services that are needed throughout the state versus each individual person getting a check. I believe that tax relief and the like is far more important, and giving relief to young people that are trying to raise families and that sort of idea is far better than just giving rebate checks back.
Thank you, Ms. Cattermass. Mr. Cook?
I think the first thing that has to be understood with this issue is that it would be against the Constitution here in North Dakota. So the first thing we'd have to do is change the Constitution. I have legislation drafted already. The legacy fund's been mentioned. We cannot touch the principal or the interests of the the interests of the legacy fund until 2017. We can only touch the principal with a 2/3 majority vote, and then only 25 or 15% of it. Alaska started their trust fund in 1976, excuse me. They have $45 billion in that trust fund. We started ours on July 1 of 2011. We now have, we haven't got our first billion yet. So we got a long ways to go before we even get in the financial position that Alaska is in to give their folks a check. I can also tell you that I've met with the tax commissioner from Alaska. That check that goes out causes a severe problem in their state. Their jails are filled the night or the weekend the checks come out. The spousal abuse goes through the roof.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Ms. Furs, you will now be directed for question number 8 as the first answer. The new chancellor of the university system has said he will request 30 new employees for his office in order to monitor the state's 11 colleges and universities. Will you support this request and other moves to centralize administration of public higher education in the state?
I believe that we need to make higher ed a more transparent and efficient, effective system. I guess I'm not familiar with that plan. I would have to do some more research into it. At this time, I don't have enough information to answer that. Thank you.
Mr. Porter, will you support this request and other moves to centralize administration of public higher education in the state?
The higher ed in the chancellor's office is coming off of some pretty turbulent times. I think as far as popularity goes, they would rank probably as low as it could go. The trust between at least myself and higher ed is not there. Between the building of presidents' homes, flying airplanes around for 60 hours a year, and the scandal at Dickinson State College, the chancellor is looking at increasing the audit staff. I wouldn't support adding any new employees to higher ed or to the chancellor's office. I would, though, allow him to pull employees from the university system and the colleges in those positions and move them back into his office to do the audits.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr. Bendish, will you support this request and other moves to centralize administration of public higher education in the state?
I have to agree with Mr. Porter that the University of North Dakota has been a very corrupt organization in appearance and how they conduct themselves. We spent a lot of money on salaries for chancellors who have left early. We paid for a lot of intern. They have not developed any trust or show of competence, and to give them another pile of money to go spend this time they're going to get it right, I would have to look into that a lot more to see if that's really something that's worth spending more taxpayers' dollars on. Like I said, President's House in Fargo, everything, the airplanes, it's not, we'll have to see more on what the whole plan is, but I haven't read his whole plan. Thank you.
Mr. Tolman, you will now be given the skip of the first answer of the question, and we'll move on to Ms. Cattermass. For question number 9, North Dakota has been able to spend nearly $1 billion in improving its transportation infrastructure, mostly in the western third of the state. What kind of level of highway construction funding can you foresee in the upcoming 2-year budget?
Well, I believe it's going to have to be more than what's been allocated for it so far. The Highway 22 keeps crumbling and that sort of thing, so we really need to get in there and do some hard work. And I think that it's going to take a lot of money to do it. We're going to continue to have a lot of traffic, a lot of heavy truck traffic that really disintegrates the infrastructure and the roads out in the west, and it really we need to push some of this money back out that way. I believe that the percentage that this state has been putting out there isn't near enough, and it needs to be more.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, what kind of level of highway construction funding can you foresee in the upcoming 2-year budget?
Well, again, that'll be all determined on the balance that we have between what we give back, what we save, and what we spend. But certainly infrastructure is going to be the top spending priority, one-time spending to fix up things that need to be fixed. If you went to work tomorrow and you all of a sudden got a $250,000 bonus, unexpected cash, what would you do with it? One might say that you would probably replace some windows or maybe replace the siding. This is what's happening to the state of North Dakota. We are finding ourselves with a $1.5 billion bonus. And it's in an investment fund. That's where this money goes to as it flows into the state. It flows into the strategic investment fund, and the sole purpose of that fund is to have money to make these one-time infrastructure expenditures. And certainly roads is going to be a top priority again. I believe we're spending $2 billion this session. I would be surprised if it gets close to that the next, but it can't all be into the west. We have needs right here in Morton County and Mandan also.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Ms. Ferris, what kind of level of highway construction funding can you foresee in the upcoming 2-year budget?
I'm not sure what a feasible amount would be to project without really having knowledge of the budget. I would expect that it would exceed the $1 billion that has been spent rather. I have family that drive in the western part of the state, and the roads are terrible. It's enough to make you worry about them coming home at the end of the week. I also agree with, while the focus really should be in part on the west, there is a whole other section of the state that we need to make sure that we're taking care of the needs of the communities in the rest of the state. Thank you.
Mr. Porter, we will be now addressing the first answer to question number 10 for you. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the state of North Dakota are in a dispute over water rights. The Corps wants to charge users of Lake Sakakawea water for storing it behind Garrison Dam. What can the legislature do to protect North Dakota water rights?
The state of North Dakota is in a really unique position. The water, according to when the dams were built, belongs to the state of North Dakota. The Corps of Engineers can't charge us to store water that is legally ours. So I would expect that if they keep pushing that issue, that will turn into a rather large fight. I think anybody from Mandan, especially that lives out in my neck of the woods, doesn't really feel very good about trusting the Corps of Engineers. I think that they showed last summer that they have some issues of their own. We're in a constant battle with the Corps over the Missouri River management. We're in a constant battle with the federal government over the management. The Corps of Engineers won't allow people to pull water out for oil fracking, which is legally ours. And so I think that that we will protect our state rights as much as we can.
Mr. Bendish, what can the legislator do to protect North Dakota water rights?
I grew up along the Wahi Reservoir. My family gave up a lot of land for that reservoir that we didn't want to give up. And a lot of it never ever been covered with water. The Corps of Engineers did a good job of land grabbing when they made these reservoirs. It's not their water. That water needs to stay in North Dakota. It is very hard to, if North Dakota is going to grow in industry or anything like that, we need to have water here to do it with. If we don't find ways to keep that water here, we're basically putting a death sentence on any major growth in industry in this state other than agriculture. We need to make sure that we put forth a united front as legislature, and that we know what we want to say and how we want to say it, and it's got to be a nonpartisan issue because that benefits everybody in this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bendish. Mr. Toman, what can the legislator do to protect North Dakota water rights?
I agree with the previous two candidates here. It's North Dakota's water, and I think that we need to, as a legislature in whole, we need to stand up for our 10th Amendment rights and protect what's legally ours. And as Mr. Bendish said, that with the growing economy and industry, we're going to need that. It's an integral part of economics and life and farming and well drilling, etc. Thanks.
Ms. Cattermas, you will now be given the skip of the first question, and we'll move on to Mr. Cook. We are moving on to question number 11. Mr. Cook, North Dakotans have watched oil development industrialize the western third of the state as companies have begun to tap the Bakken Formation. Is the state doing enough to protect the public and private environment in the oil patch?
Is the state doing enough to protect the environment? I would say yes, we are. Is there more to do? I think it's there's always a tug of war between the oil industry and the landowners who don't benefit, I think, from the oil industry and the profit that's going on out there. I think that always creates friction. We have some environmental problems that come with this industry. You're always going to have them. You've got to continually address them. Do you address them fast enough for the people that are dealing with the problems? No, you don't. How do you address it faster? You know, one of the things that'd be nice in that oil industry, if we could pass legislation that summer had to last 12 months long, we could get a lot of our problem solved then. But the dusty roads, the environmental issues, I think the state has got now the toughest laws in the nation regarding the pits. So we've certainly moved a long ways in that way, but you know, it's an issue that will always be on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Ms. Ferris, is the state doing enough to protect the public and private environment in the oil patch?
I think when it comes to protecting the environment, I think the state is doing a good job. I think, you know, the environment is definitely important, but I think where the state could step up would be protecting the communities in those areas and making sure that they have enough police force in those areas and other infrastructure type needs. Thank you.
Mr. Porter, is the state doing enough to protect the public and private environment in the oil patch?
I think every session we deal with issues that talk about both of these issues. Last session we had landmark legislation that brought the surface owners to the table with the oil industry so that they felt like they had a voice in what was going on their surface. We have a split estate law in North Dakota that gives priority to the mineral owner, and when that happens, there's always going to be a tug of war that takes place. Lynn Helms in our North Dakota Oil and Gas Division has a great group of employees. We as a state have invested heavily in making sure we not only keep those employees by competitive wages, but have added to them. They are the regulators and they are the environmentalists, making sure that the things that are happening out there are not harming our water and our land. We switched to a closed loop system. We run triple case wells down through the fresh water.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. We will now be moving on to question number 12, which will be our last question for this evening. Mr. Benish, you will start off question number 12. Officials in the Fargo area want to move water from the Missouri River to the Red River to provide adequate residential and industrial water resources in that area. The groundwork for this project has been put into place. Given the state's strong financial position, should the 2013 legislature move to expedite this project?
I don't know, that's the first I've heard of this issue. I must have missed that in the Tribune. I would have to see what it's going to entail, what it's going to cost, if that's something we need to expedite, how bad the water problem is, and is there other places they can go for water? We're trying to get water out of Devil's Lake. Do we have too much of, which is a lot closer to Fargo than taking Missouri River water? Maybe it's not as good a water, but right now we have needs in this part of the state. We've tried for years to have the Garrison Diversion Project finished to put water east. There's something that needs to be looked into, and I need to look up on it more and educate myself a little more before I can give more of a comment on that.
Thank you. Mr. Tillman, given the state's strong financial position, should the 2013 legislature move to expedite this project?
It certainly would be a cost issue to look at. I don't know that it would be a priority to expedite that from the Missouri River. As Mr. Bendish said, we have water in Devil's Lake that is closer, but the project has been, the Garrison Diversion Project has been in place, part of it, for a while. So I think first and foremost you have to look at the cost of that project and what that would all entail before we would dedicate any funding to expedite that.
Ms. Cattermas, given the state's strong financial position, should the 2013 legislature move to expedite this project?
I believe that that is something that really needs to be looked at and studied probably quite a bit more before we decide to use any of our monies for that. I mean, I really believe that, I know that water diversion is important and needs, and if Fargo needs water, that is important for the residents there, but there are ways to go about doing this, and we do have some priorities, and I don't know that that is so much of a priority for this next legislative session, but I think there should definitely be a study on it.
Thank you. That'll be our last question for this evening. Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. You will now have 1 minute to provide a closing comment, and we will start with Ms. Furris.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I think it's really important that people have access to their legislators and also potential legislators. So thank you for this opportunity.
Mr. Porter?
Once again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for allowing us this opportunity. I would ask the voters of Mandan for their continued support as we move forward in the next election. We heard a lot about infrastructure, a lot about the West. I think it's important that people realize that we put more money into funds for Western North Dakota than they could spend in the 2 years that they have to spend it before we meet again. The governor is working diligently on putting funds together again to the tune of $1.5 to $2 billion worth of money to go out and take care of some of those infrastructures. If we would get things like the Trans-Canada pipeline to happen and get the federal government out of the way, that would take a lot of burden off of our roads and our infrastructure. We have a lot of infrastructure being built out in Western North Dakota and a lot of things happening. So it's an exciting time. Thank you.
Mr. Bendish?
I'd like to thank you for having me here tonight. Thank the League of Women Voters. I'd like to say I hope that I've been able to show why I could help Mandan grow in support of the voters in Mandan. I think it's important to realize that the oil boom that we talk about out west, it's already here in Mandan. If you work in my line of work and you try to go and you work in this part of the state, you know, in the power plants and that, it's already hard to find places to stay in. Buell is hard to place to stay in Hazen because oil workers are there. If you go out to the truck stop, what's the town I do every morning on the way to work, you're going to see many people lining up and they're getting in cars and they're heading west to work. The boom is here in Mandan. We have to remember you can only grow so fast, and the thing we need to think about is like Governor Link, the last boom, he tried to control it and slow it down because it's a one-time harvest, and to make sure that it benefits the people in North Dakota first. I'd like to see more refineries in that to help deal with this oil surplus. You know, we only have one in the state. I think we should move forward trying to do more of that because that's long-term growth, long-term jobs, long-term prosperity. Thank you.
Mr. Tolman?
Once again, thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this and allowing us to all be here. And thank you for all your questions. I think that, well, I know that there's a lot of money and a lot of needs coming in this next session, and my hope is that the legislature can handle that in a fiscally responsible manner while supplying real tax relief to the people, and I look forward to taking part of that if I'm elected. Thank you.
Ms. Cattermas?
I as well would like to thank the League of Women Voters for having us here. And in closing, I would like to let everybody know that I am here because of the wonderful people here in Mandan, and I would love to represent them. We have a lot of critical issues coming up in this state that I think I could be a big part of helping address, and that I believe government, even local government, needs to speak for the communities and the people that are here. I'm not just about sending money out west. I am about representing the people here and our needs here and our problems that we need to address as the state changes. Thank you.
Mr. Cook?
Well, again, Hannah, I want to thank you also, and I'll also thank the League of Women Voters, but not just for letting us get together, but to thank you for your commitment to sound government and for all that you folks do. I do appreciate it. You know, North Dakota is the envy of the nation. We have the highest or the largest growth in personal income of any state in the nation. We have the lowest unemployment. We are truly the envy of the nation. Yet as I go around and knock on doors, and I've knocked on a lot of them already, there's a lot of anxiety out there. There's a lot of concern and a little worry about what's coming down the road. I don't think it's driven by what we're doing here in North Dakota. It's driven by what's going on in Washington, D.C. And that's what's creating the anxiety. We have some terrible crises about looming over there. We have a financial cliff that we're about to go over. If this country goes over this financial cliff, believe me, the things that we're going to be talking about in the legislature will be entirely different. That's our challenges, and we need to be prepared for it. North Dakota needs to be a world-class state. We will be the best state when it comes to handling the troubles that might come down from Congress. We are in a position to handle it, and I do thank you all.
Thank you, candidates, for being with us tonight. I wish to thank the Bismarck Tribune, Dakota Media Access, and the volunteers from the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. Thank you to the viewers at home and the audience members here tonight for taking the time to learn more about the candidates and issues. This program will replay several times on Government Access, Cable Channel 2, and will be available online viewing at www.freetv.org in the days leading up to the November 6th election. Before we close this candidate forum, I want to remind you that voting in North Dakota is very simple, and you can find voting information at your county auditor's office and from the office of the North Dakota Secretary of State. Thank you and good night.
If you enjoyed this program, would like to see it again, or send the link to your friends, it's available at freetv.org.